The message arrived at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time, and Ambassador Elena Vance knew immediately that something was wrong. She had served humanity for 30 years in the diplomatic corps, and she had learned to read the signs that others missed completely. The Galactic Council never sent urgent summons without a reason, and their reasons were rarely good for species like humanity. Elena stood in her office on Luna Station, staring at the holographic seal of the Council that floated above her desk. The seal showed 12 stars arranged in a circle, each one representing an elder race that had ruled the galaxy for thousands upon thousands of years. Humanity was not among those stars, and Elena suspected that humanity never would be. "Ambassador," her aide said from the doorway, "Captain Cole is here as you requested." She turned to see Marcus Cole enter the room. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and scars on his hands that told stories of battles fought and survived. Marcus had served in the Fringe Wars, defending human colonies from raiders and worse, and Elena trusted him more than anyone else in the galaxy. "You saw the summons," Elena said, and it was not a question. Marcus nodded slowly. "They want us at Nexus Prime within 48 hours, which means they want us rushing and unprepared. What do you think it means?" Marcus crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. "Nothing good, Ambassador, and I think you already know that." Elena did know it. She had known it the moment she saw that seal glowing in the darkness of her office. For 80 years, humanity had been a provisional member of the Galactic Council. 80 years of proving themselves, of contributing to galactic society, of following rules that seemed designed to keep them small and weak. And in all that time, humanity had never once been treated as equals. The elder races looked down on humans the way a giant might look down on an ant. They tolerated humanity because humans were useful, because human engineers could solve problems that stumped other species, because human doctors had developed cures that saved millions of alien lives. But tolerance was not respect, and Elena had felt that difference every single day of her career. She began to pack for the journey, gathering documents and reports that she might need. As she worked, she thought about all the indignities humanity had suffered since first contact. The Council had given humans the worst colony worlds, planets with toxic atmospheres and unstable geology that no other species wanted. They had denied humanity access to the Jump Gate network for decades, forcing human ships to travel at slower than light speeds while other species zipped across the galaxy in moments. They had imposed tribute tariffs on human goods that made fair trade almost impossible. And through it all, humans had endured. They had terraformed those toxic worlds and made them bloom with life. They had developed their own fold space technology when the gates were denied to them. They had built a civilization that any species should be proud of. But pride meant nothing to the elder races. To them, humanity would always be the newcomers, the children, the primitives who had barely crawled out of their gravity well. The journey to Nexus Prime took 36 hours through fold space. Elena spent most of that time reviewing files and preparing arguments, though she suspected that arguments would not matter much. Marcus spent his time in the ship's small gym, burning off nervous energy through exercise. When they finally dropped out of fold space near the galactic core, Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. Nexus Prime was ancient beyond human understanding. The station had been built by species that had gone extinct before life on Earth had crawled out of the oceans. It was massive, a structure of crystal and metal that seemed to glow with its own inner light, and it hung in space like a jewel surrounded by darkness. Thousands of ships swarmed around the station, vessels from hundreds of different species going about their business. Elena spotted Valori crystal ships and Crocian warcraft and the living vessels of the Etherian Collective. Among all those ships, her own small human vessel looked like a toy. "Impressive," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her at the viewport. "It is meant to intimidate," Elena replied. Everything about this place is designed to make younger species feel small. They docked at a port reserved for provisional members, which was located far from the grand entrances used by the elder races. A Valari official met them at the airlock, a being made of living crystal that shifted colors as it spoke. Ambassador Vance, the Valori said, its voice like chimes in wind. The High Arbiter has expedited your evaluation, and the council will convene tomorrow morning. Elena kept her face neutral, even as her heart sank. Expedited, she repeated. May I ask why? The Valari's crystals shifted to a colder blue. The council does not explain itself to provisional members, Ambassador. And you would do well to remember that. The official turned and glided away without another word, leaving Elena and Marcus alone in the cold metal corridor. Friendly place, Marcus muttered. They were escorted to quarters that were functional but bare. Nothing like the luxurious suites provided to elder race delegates. Elena did not complain because complaining would change nothing. That evening, a knock came at her door. Elena opened it to find a Relari standing in the hallway, its 4 eyes blinking nervously. The Relari were a younger species like humanity, amphibious beings who had joined the council only 300 years ago. Ambassador Vance, the Relari whispered. May I speak with you privately? Elena stepped aside and let the alien enter. The Relari looked around the room as if checking for surveillance devices, then leaned close. I should not be here, the Relari said, but I could not stay silent, for what they plan to do is wrong. What do you mean? Elena asked, her voice steady despite her growing alarm. The evaluation tomorrow is not a true evaluation, the Relari explained. The decision has already been made, Ambassador, and the vote has already been counted. Elena felt cold. What decision? The Relari's 4 eyes were full of something that looked like pity. They are going to reclassify humanity as a client species, which means you will no longer be provisional members working toward full membership. Client species, Elena repeated slowly. She knew what that meant because she had studied council law. Client species had no rights, no representation, no future. They existed only to serve the elder races. They say humanity is too dangerous, the Relari continued. They say your independence threatens galactic stability, and they say you must be controlled before it is too late. Elena stood in silence for a long moment. Everything she had worked for, everything humanity had achieved, was about to be taken away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. The Relari moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Because I watched your people share medicine freely with worlds that had nothing to offer in return. And I watched your doctors save my clutch sister's life. When our own healers had given up hope, the alien's voice dropped to a whisper. And because someone should have warned my people before the council did the same thing to us 300 years ago. Then the Relari was gone, and Elena was left alone with the weight of what she had learned. She turned to find Marcus watching her. His face was hard, but his eyes held a question. Tomorrow, Elena said quietly, we fight for everything humanity is and everything we might become. Marcus nodded once. Then we better not lose. Elena looked out the small window at the stars, those distant points of light that humanity had dreamed about for thousands of years. Somewhere out there, 8 billion humans lived their lives without knowing that their fate would be decided in the morning. She would not fail them. She could not fail them. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest enclosed space Elena had ever seen. It stretched upward for hundreds of meters, a vast dome of crystal that showed the swirling colors of the galactic core beyond. Seating platforms floated at different levels, each one carrying delegates from different species, and at the very top sat the 12 elder races on thrones of light and power. Elena walked down the central pathway with Marcus at her side, and she felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching her every step. Some of those eyes were curious, some were hostile, and some held emotions she could not begin to read. The pathway ended at a circular platform in the center of the chamber, and this was where accused species stood to face the judgment of the council. Elena had read about this place in historical records, and she knew that no species had ever stood here and walked away unchanged. The High Arbiter of the Valori looked down from the highest throne, a being of pure crystal that pulsed with ancient light. The Arbiter was old beyond human understanding, having served the council for over 10,000 years, and its voice carried the weight of all those centuries. This session of the Galactic Council is now convened, the High Arbiter announced, its voice filling every corner of the vast chamber. We gather to evaluate the species known as humanity and to determine their proper place in galactic civilization. Elena stood straight and tall, refusing to look small even though everything around her was designed to make her feel exactly that. Ambassador Elena Vance speaks for humanity, the Arbiter continued. Let the charges be presented. Charges, Elena thought bitterly. They called this an evaluation, but they used the language of a criminal trial. The first to speak was the Valori representative, a being of sharp angles and cold blue light. Humanity has shown a dangerous pattern of recklessness in their research, the Valori declared. They pursue fold space technology without proper council oversight, and they experiment with forces that could destabilize the fabric of space itself. Elena wanted to protest that humanity had been forced to develop fold space technology because the council had denied them gate access. But she held her tongue and waited her turn. The Croatian ambassador rose next, a massive creature covered in armored plates that clicked when it moved. Humanity breeds at an alarming rate, the Croatian growled. Their population has tripled since first contact, and at this rate, they will outnumber many elder race species within centuries. As if population growth was a crime, Elena thought. As if wanting children and families was something to be ashamed of. The Etherian collective spoke through a shared mind, their words coming from a dozen bodies at once. Human emotions are chaotic and disruptive, the collective intoned. Their art and music and literature spread across the networks, infecting other species with their disorder, and their mental noise interferes with our telepathic communications. Elena almost laughed at that one. Humanity was being accused of creating too much art and feeling too many emotions. The Mortith ambassador slithered forward on its many legs, its voice a hiss of contempt. Humanity insists on their primitive concept of individual rights, the Mortith declared. They refuse to accept the natural order of collective obedience, and they spread these dangerous ideas to other species. One by one, the elder races presented their accusations. Humanity was too ambitious, too creative, too independent, too hopeful. Humanity asked too many questions and refused to accept answers that did not make sense. Humanity treated younger species as equals instead of maintaining proper hierarchical distance. Every virtue Elena had ever been proud of was twisted into a crime. When the last accusation had been made, the High Arbiter turned its cold light toward Elena. The human representative may now speak in defense of her species. Elena stepped forward, and her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. Honored Council, I thank you for the opportunity to address these concerns. She kept her tone calm and respectful, even though anger burned in her chest. For 80 years, humanity has contributed to galactic civilization in countless ways. Our medical researchers developed the cure for stellar plague, which we shared freely with every species that asked. Our engineers solved the Kepler station crisis when the station's orbit began to decay, saving 3 million lives. Our humanitarian missions have brought aid to dozens of worlds struck by disaster. Elena paused and looked around the chamber. We have asked nothing in return for these contributions, except to be treated as equals. Yet at every turn, we have been denied. We have been given the worst worlds, denied gate access, and taxed into poverty. And still we persevered, because we believed that fairness and justice would eventually prevail. She met the High Arbiter's gaze directly. I ask only that this council judge humanity by our actions, not by the fears of those who do not understand us. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the High Arbiter spoke, and his voice was as cold as the void between stars. Your contributions are noted, Ambassador, but contributions do not erase nature. Humanity is disruptive by your very existence, and you do not know your place in the galactic order. We have tried to earn our place, Elena replied. What more would you have us do? The Mordith ambassador laughed, a horrible hissing sound. Earn, it mocked. As if place can be earned. Place is assigned by those who have the power to assign it. The High Arbiter raised one crystalline limb. Enough discussion. The Council will now vote on the matter of human reclassification. Elena's heart pounded as she watched the voting commence. One by one, the elder races cast their decisions, and one by one, the votes fell against humanity. 11 votes for reclassification. Only one vote against, from a species Elena did not recognize. The Council has decided, the High Arbiter announced. Humanity is hereby reclassified from provisional member status to client species status, effective immediately upon signature of the Treaty of Submission. A document materialized in the air before Elena, glowing with official seals and legal language. She read through it quickly, and each line was worse than the last. Human worlds would be administered by elder race governors. Human ships would be restricted to sublight travel within designated zones. Human citizens would be subject to conscription for council labor projects. Human children would attend mandatory cultural integration programs. The last item hit Elena like a physical blow. Cultural integration meant the erasure of human identity, the rewriting of human history, the destruction of everything that made humanity unique. Ambassador Vance, the High Arbiter said, extending a limb toward the glowing document. Sign the treaty, and this matter will be concluded. Elena stared at the treaty, and she felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders. She looked at Marcus, who stood rigid beside her. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were burning with contained rage. She looked at the council, at those ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia, and who expected her to bow just as every other species had bowed. She looked at the younger species in the chamber, those races who watched with fear and resignation, who had learned long ago that defiance brought only suffering. The treaty floated before her, waiting for her signature, waiting for her surrender. Elena reached out her hand. Ambassador, the High Arbiter said, a note of satisfaction creeping into its voice. You make the wise choice. Elena touched the treaty with her fingertips. Then she pulled her hand back. I request a brief recess, she said, her voice steady. I must consult with my government before signing a document of this magnitude. The High Arbiter's crystals flickered with annoyance. This is most irregular. Nevertheless, Elena replied, I must insist. A long pause followed, and then the High Arbiter waved one limb dismissively. Very well. You have 1 hour, Ambassador. Do not waste the Council's time with futile delays. Elena turned and walked toward the exit, her back straight and her head held high. Marcus fell into step beside her, and together they left the grand chamber. The doors closed behind them, and Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. 1 hour to decide the fate of humanity. 1 hour to find another way. The recess chamber was small and cold, a stark contrast to the grand hall they had just left behind. Elena stood by the window, staring out at the endless stars while Marcus worked to establish a secure communication link with Earth. Her mind raced through possibilities, searching for a path that would not lead to disaster. Connection established, Marcus announced. The United Terran Parliament is standing by. A holographic display flickered to life. showing the faces of Earth's leaders gathered in an emergency session. Prime Minister Okonkwo sat at the center, her expression grave and determined. Around her were admirals and senators and diplomats, all of them watching Elena with desperate hope. "Ambassador Vance," the Prime Minister said, "we watched the entire proceeding, and we understand the situation you face." "Then you understand there are no good options," Elena replied. "If I sign that treaty, humanity loses everything. But if I refuse, they will enforce their decision anyway." "Will they?" asked Admiral Chun, leaning forward with sharp eyes. "Enforcement requires resources, and even the Council cannot be everywhere at once." "You are suggesting we resist," Elena said. "I am suggesting we consider all possibilities," the Admiral replied. Prime Minister Okonkwo raised her hand for silence. "Before we discuss strategy, we must first answer a more fundamental question. What kind of people do we want to be?" The chamber fell quiet. "For 80 years, we have played by their rules," the Prime Minister continued. "We have swallowed our pride and accepted their insults because we believed that cooperation was the path to peace. But what has that earned us?" She stood and walked closer to the display, her eyes locked on Elena's. "They do not want cooperation, Ambassador. They want submission. And no amount of good behavior will ever change that." Elena thought about those words, and she thought about human history. She thought about the millions who had been enslaved throughout the centuries and who had chosen to fight for freedom, even when the odds seemed impossible. She thought about the scientists who had challenged powerful institutions to speak truth, knowing they might be destroyed. She thought about the ordinary people who had stood against tyranny again and again, not because victory was certain, but because surrender was unthinkable. "My grandfather used to tell me stories," Marcus said quietly, stepping up beside Elena. "He survived the Croatian Purge of Colony 7, when the Council looked away while 60,000 humans were massacred. Everyone turned to look at him. The Croatian burned our homes and killed our families. And the Council did nothing because we were just provisional members, not worth protecting," Marcus continued. "My grandfather lost everyone he loved in a single night, and he was left alone in the ashes of everything he had known." His voice was steady, but Elena could hear the old pain beneath the words. "Do you know what he did?" Marcus asked. "He did not give up. He did not surrender. He found other survivors, and together they rebuilt. They raised new families and planted new crops and created a new community from nothing. And when I asked him how he found the strength to keep going, he told me something I have never forgotten." Marcus looked at Elena. "He said that they wanted us to break, and that was why he refused. He said that hope is not something that can be taken away unless you choose to give it up." Elena felt those words settle into her heart. She looked back at the Parliament display, at the faces of leaders who carried the weight of humanity's future. What happens if we refuse to sign? "Unknown," Prime Minister Okonkwo admitted. "They may blockade our worlds, and they will certainly cut us off from the Gate Network. We will be isolated and alone." "We have been isolated before," said Sandra Williams, an old woman whose family had helped colonize Mars. "We crossed the ocean in wooden ships, not knowing if we would find land. We launched ourselves into space in metal cans that barely held together. We have always been alone, and we have always survived." "The Council expects us to be afraid," Admiral Chun added. "They expect us to crumble without their support. But they do not understand what humans are capable of when we have no choice but to fight." Elena walked back to the window and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, children were going to school and learning about the universe. Couples were falling in love and planning futures together. Artists were creating beauty and scientists were chasing discoveries. 8 billion people were living their lives, trusting that their leaders would protect what mattered most. She picked up the copy of the treaty that she had brought from the chamber and read through it one more time. The words were worse than she remembered. Human children would be subject to cultural integration programs, which meant they would be taught to be ashamed of their heritage. Human history would be revised for council archives, which meant their story would be erased and replaced with lies. Human autonomy would be eliminated, and humans would exist only to serve their masters. This was not a treaty. This was the death of everything humanity had ever been. They want us to be afraid of being alone, Elena said softly. Are you afraid? The Prime Minister asked. Elena thought about her mother, who had raised 3 children on a mining colony while working double shifts. She thought about her father, who had died defending that colony from raiders. She thought about every human who had ever looked at impossible odds and refused to quit. No, Elena said finally. I am not afraid. She turned to face the Parliament. For 80 years, we gave them everything we had, and they answered with contempt. We shared our medicine and our knowledge and our hope, and they treated us like servants. Our voice grew stronger. We did not cross the void between stars just to kneel at the feet of beings who despise us. We did not survive ice ages and plagues and wars just to surrender our children to cultural erasure. What do you propose? Prime Minister Okonkwo asked. Elena looked at Marcus, and she saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. I propose that we stop pretending, Elena said. They will never accept us as equals because they do not want equals. They want subjects. And if those are our only options, if we must choose between submission and isolation, then I say we choose to stand alone. The Council will be furious, warned Senator Williams. Let them be furious, Elena replied. They have mistaken our patience for weakness and our cooperation for fear. It is time they learned the truth about humanity. The Prime Minister was quiet for a long moment, and then she slowly smiled. Ambassador Vance, you have the full authority of the United Terran Parliament. Whatever you decide in that chamber, we will stand behind you. All of you? Elena asked, looking at each face in turn. One by one, they nodded. Admiral Chun spoke for all of them. We would rather die on our feet than live on our knees, and that has always been the human way. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for emotion later. Then it is decided, she said. Marcus, we should return to the chamber. Marcus straightened his uniform and checked his sidearm. Ready when you are, Ambassador. Elena took one last look at the treaty in her hands, the document that would destroy everything humanity had ever been. Then she walked toward the door. The hour was almost up, and the council was waiting for her answer. They expected her to sign. They expected her to submit. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The doors to the grand chamber swung open, and Elena Vance walked back in with her head held high. Every eye in the vast room turned toward her, and the silence was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species watched as she made her way down the central pathway, and not one of them dared to speak. Marcus walked beside her, his footsteps steady and sure. His face was calm, but Elena could see the fire burning in his eyes. The High Arbiter looked down from its throne of light, and its crystalline form flickered with impatience. Ambassador Vance, your hour has ended, and the council awaits your decision. Elena stopped at the central platform and looked up at the assembled elder races. She saw the Valori with their cold perfection, the Crocian with their brutal strength, the Etherian with their alien minds, and the Mortith with their ancient cruelty. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and in all that time, no one had ever told them no. Today that would change. I have consulted with my government, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We have discussed the treaty at length, and we have reached a decision. The High Arbiter gestured toward the floating document. Then sign, Ambassador, and let us be done with this matter. Elena reached out and took the treaty in her hands. The document felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of humanity's entire future. She looked at the words one final time. Cultural integration for human children. Revision of human history. Elimination of human autonomy. The death of everything her species had ever been. Elena looked up at the High Arbiter, and she smiled. Then she tore the treaty in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the grand chamber like a thunderclap. Gasps of shock and outrage erupted from every platform, and several delegates rose to their feet in fury. "What is this?" the High Arbiter demanded, its crystal form pulsing with angry red light. "Ambassador Vance, what have you done?" "Humanity declines," Elena said simply. The chamber exploded into chaos. The Mortith ambassador shrieked in rage, and its many legs churned as it surged forward. The Crocian pounded its armored fists against its platform, and the sound was like bombs going off. The Etherian collective buzzed with telepathic outrage that even non-psychics could feel. "Silence," the High Arbiter commanded, and its voice shook the very walls. "Ambassador Vance, you cannot decline. The Council has ruled, and the Council's word is law." "Your law," Elena replied. "Not ours." She let the torn pieces of the treaty fall to the floor, and she did not look down as they drifted away. "For 80 years, humanity came to you in good faith," Elena said, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "We shared our medicine with worlds that had nothing to offer in return. We sent our engineers to solve crises that threatened millions of lives. We opened our hearts and our hands because we believed that the galaxy could be better than it was." The chamber grew quiet as she spoke, not from respect but from shock. No one had ever spoken to the Council this way. "We asked only to be treated as equals," Elena continued. "We asked only for fairness and justice and a chance to prove ourselves. And what did we receive in return?" She pointed at the Valori. "You called our curiosity dangerous." She pointed at the Crocian. "You called our families a threat." She pointed at the Etherian. "You called our emotions a disease." She pointed at the Mortith. "You called our freedom a crime." Her arm dropped, and she stared up at the High Arbiter. "You see our compassion as weakness. You see our hope as stupidity. You see our kindness as something to be exploited. You are wrong." Her words rang through the chamber like bells. "We walked upright on a world that tried to kill us with ice ages and plagues and disasters beyond counting. We crossed oceans in wooden ships with nothing but the stars to guide us. We split the atom and touched the moon and reached out into the darkness between stars." Elena took a step forward, and her voice grew stronger. "We have fought against tyrants and monsters throughout our history, and we have never surrendered. We have faced extinction 100 times, and each time we have refused to die. And now you stand before us with your treaties and your threats and your ancient arrogance, and you expect us to kneel?" She shook her head slowly. "We will not kneel. We have never kneeled. And we will not start now." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena turned her back on the Council, and the act was such an insult that several delegates actually screamed. To turn your back on the elder races was unthinkable. An act of defiance that had not been committed in recorded history. "You will be alone," the High Arbiter shouted, its voice cracking with fury. "Cast out from galactic civilization. No jump gates, no trade, no protection. The void will swallow your species whole." Elena paused at the threshold of the great doors. She looked back over her shoulder at the Council, at those ancient beings who had expected her to bow as every other species had bowed for 10,000 years. "We have been alone before," she said quietly, and somehow her soft words carried further than all their shouting. "We crossed millions of miles of empty space to reach our first neighboring planet, and we did it with technology that would make your children laugh." She smiled, and there was no fear in that smile. "We will manage." Marcus fell into step beside her, and together they walked toward the exit. Behind them, the council erupted into chaos once more, but they did not look back. The doors swung open. Elena and Marcus stepped through, and then the doors closed behind them, and humanity had walked away from galactic civilization. The corridor beyond was empty and silent, a strange contrast to the pandemonium they had left behind. Elena kept walking, her footsteps echoing on the metal floor, and she did not stop until they reached the docking bay where their ship waited. Only then did she allow herself to feel the enormity of what she had done. "Ambassador," Marcus said quietly. "Elena, are you all right?" She leaned against the hull of their ship and closed her eyes. Her hands were trembling, and her heart was pounding so hard that she could barely breathe. "I just told the most powerful beings in the galaxy to go to hell," she whispered. "No, Marcus, I am definitely not all right." He put a hand on her shoulder. "You were magnificent. I might have just doomed our entire species. Or you might have saved us," Marcus replied. "Some things are worse than death, Ambassador. Living on your knees is one of them." Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. This man who had survived the worst the galaxy could offer, and who still believed in hope. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus shrugged. "Now we go home and we prepare for whatever comes next. We tell our people the truth, and we let them decide if we made the right choice." Elena thought about those 8 billion humans, scattered across dozens of worlds. She thought about the children who would grow up free, with their own history and their own identity intact. She thought about the future that might still be possible if they were brave enough to fight for it. "You are right," she said finally. "Let us go home." They boarded their ship and lifted off from Nexus Prime. Behind them, the ancient station receded into the darkness, and before them lay the long journey back to Earth. Elena did not know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it standing tall. 5 years had passed since Elena Vance tore the treaty in half and walked away from the Galactic Council. The galaxy had expected humanity to collapse without the support of galactic civilization. The elder races had predicted that humans would come crawling back within months, begging for forgiveness and ready to accept any terms. They had been so certain of this that they did not even bother to watch. They should have been watching. Elena stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, a structure that had been built in neutral space over the past 3 years. The station was modest compared to Nexus Prime, but it represented something far more valuable than size or grandeur. It represented freedom. Through the viewport, Elena could see ships arriving from a dozen different worlds. There were human vessels with their distinctive angular designs, and there were Relari shuttles with their organic curves. There were Torvith warships painted in clan colors, and there were Nim transports that seemed to shimmer and shift as they moved. Every one of those ships had come here by choice. Every one of those species had chosen to stand with humanity. Secretary General Elena Vance smiled as she watched them gather. That was her title now, leader of the Free Terran Republic and coordinator of the Coalition of Independent Species. It was a heavy burden, but she bore it gladly. "Quite a sight," Marcus said, stepping up beside her. He wore the uniform of Coalition Defense Command now, his chest decorated with medals he had earned protecting their new alliance. "I never imagined we would come this far," Elena admitted. "When we walked out of that chamber, I thought we might be walking toward our doom." "So did they," Marcus replied with a grin. That was their mistake. She remembered those first terrible months after the walkout. The Council had cut off their gate access as promised, and human ships had been forced to travel through the long darkness of normal space. Trade had collapsed, supplies had dwindled, and many had wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But humanity had not given up. The fold space research that the Valori had called dangerous finally achieved. Breakthrough just 18 months after the walkout. Human scientists discovered how to create their own pathways through folded space, independent of the gate network. The technology was different from what the elder races used, and in many ways, it was better. Human ships began appearing in systems they were not supposed to be able to reach. At first, the Council dismissed these reports as errors, but the evidence became impossible to ignore. Humanity had done what the elder races had said was impossible. And then the messages started arriving. The first came from the Rilari, the same species that had warned Elena about the Council's plan. They requested a secret meeting to discuss mutual cooperation. Elena agreed, and that meeting led to the first alliance. The second message came from the sundered clans of Torvith, a warrior species that had chafed under Council restrictions for centuries. They had watched the broadcast of Elena's speech, and her words had stirred something in their hearts. The third message came from the exiled Nim Collective, a species that had been cast out by the Council for refusing to abandon their religious traditions. They had wandered the outer reaches for generations, and they saw in humanity a kindred spirit. More messages followed, from species Elena had never heard of, and species she had only read about in history files. The Council's rule had never been as absolute as they pretended, and countless civilizations had suffered under their control. Now those civilizations were reaching out to each other. Now they were building something new. A door opened behind Elena, and she turned to see Ambassador Kethri of the Rilari entering the observation deck. Kethri had 4 eyes that blinked in sequence, and right now all 4 of those eyes were bright with excitement. "Secretary General," Kethri said, "the delegations are assembled, and they are ready to begin." Elena nodded and straightened her uniform. "Then let us not keep them waiting." She walked through the corridors of Unity Station, passing workers from a dozen species who nodded respectfully as she went by. These hallways had been built by human engineers and Torvith craftsmen and Nim architects, all working together toward a common goal. The main assembly chamber was filled with representatives from 17 different species, more than had ever gathered outside Council space. They sat in a circle rather than a hierarchy, and each delegation had equal voice regardless of size or power. Elena took her place among them, not above them. "Friends," she said, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber, "we gathered today to formalize what has grown naturally over the past 5 years. We gathered to sign the charter of the Coalition of Independent Species." She looked around the circle at faces that were alien in shape, but familiar in spirit. These were beings who had suffered and struggled and refused to give up. These were beings who understood the value of freedom because they had been denied it for so long. "The Council ruled through fear for 10,000 years, Elena continued. "They convinced us that we were weak, that we could not survive without their guidance, that independence was impossible and dangerous." She paused and smiled. "We have proven them wrong." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. "This coalition is not an empire," Elena said. "We do not seek to dominate or control. We ask only that each species be allowed to chart their own course and that we support each other in times of need. What we build here today is based on respect and cooperation and mutual benefit. No species will be forced to kneel, and no species will be treated as lesser. We are different in many ways, but in the things that matter most, we are the same." She picked up a stylus and signed her name to the charter. One by one, the other representatives did the same, and each signature was met with quiet applause. When the last name had been added, Elena stood and looked out the window at the gathered ships. "The Council will not accept this quietly," warned General Vorthen of Torvith, a massive being covered in battle scars. "They will try to destroy what we have built. Let them try," Elena replied. "We are stronger together than any of us were alone, and we will only grow stronger with time." As if to prove her point, a new ship appeared through the viewport, emerging from a fold space jump. It was a design Elena did not recognize, and its markings were unfamiliar. "Secretary General," a communication officer called out. "We are receiving a transmission from the new arrival. They say they are from the Velith sovereignty, and they have heard about the coalition." Elena smiled. Another species reaching out, another potential ally, another civilization ready to stand for freedom. "Open a channel," she said. "Let us welcome them." As she moved to greet the newcomers, she noticed a human child pressed against the viewing window in the corridor. The girl was maybe 7 years old, and she was waving enthusiastically at a Relari child who waved back from a passing shuttle. Two children from different worlds, meeting without fear, without hierarchy, just connection. Elena watched them for a moment, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. This was why she had torn that treaty. This was why humanity had walked away from the Council. Not for power or pride or revenge, but for moments exactly like this one. She thought about the High Arbiter's words on that day 5 years ago, the warning that the Void would swallow humanity whole. The Void had not swallowed them. The Void had set them free. Elena wiped her eyes and walked toward the communication center, ready to meet another new friend. Behind her, through the great windows of Unity Station, the stars shone bright with possibility. The galaxy had ruled through fear for 10,000 years. It had never considered what might happen if someone simply stopped being afraid. Now it knew, and nothing would ever be the same again.